Welcome back to our panel discussion, Navigating Cloud Contracting, Who Owns the Data, sponsored by NetApp and Lockheed Martin on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com. Our guests today are Ann Duncan, the Chief Information Officer of the Environmental Protection Agency. Maria Roat is the Chief Technology Officer of the Transportation Department. Todd Simpson, Chief Information Officer of the Food and Drug Administration. Melvin Greer, Senior Fellow and Chief Strategist at Lockheed Martin. And Alan Dare, the District Manager for NetApp's U.S. Public Sector Cloud Team. And before the break, we were talking about the idea of standards and guidance that's coming from some of the federal agencies themselves. We were talking about NIST guidance. And Melvin, you're involved in some of the NIST guidance creation. Tell us how that works.
Yeah, sure. So we're very excited about the fact that the government has actually included and invited industry to participate in the development of some of the guidance. And so Lockheed Martin actually does participate in the NIST security working group and the new privacy working group as well. And there are a number of guidance documents that have been already published. As an example, the risk management framework is one that's really, really important. But there are two in progress that are equally as important, I think just as impactful. I believe the SP 800 173, which is the guidance around how to develop the cloud-based systems and adopt security controls for them. And then 800-174. These two in-draft documents are now allowing industry to participate in the development of the guidance in a way that's going to make it easier for us to ensure that we adhere to it and then work with government to ensure that it meets their needs going forward.
All right, so 173 is cloud development and cloud security, and 174 is privacy,
That's right.
which in many ways are kind of hand in glove when you think about it.
Yeah, that's right. That's one of the reasons why they're working together. They are very different, however. Privacy is very different from security, but it is clear that they have a relationship that we need to be aware of before we start trying to improve on data governance.
Okay, and earlier we talked about the different data types, and that actually has an effect on governance, also whether you adopt cloud for that particular type of data and the applications associated with it. Maria, tell us more about that.
I think, the practice of data governance is generally the same. So regardless of the type of data. So in general, the practice is the same. But there's a couple things that change when you're actually governing a wide variety of data. And really that's about the standards. What are the standards around quality and security around that data? And then the ways in which you apply those standards and how you enforce those. So really the practice of governance, while that may stay the same, around all the data types, there's those two aspects, I think, that really change. Again, that's the kind of standards and the way those standards get applied. And you really got to think through and the governance and how you apply those standards with the mission. How is the mission using the data? How do you need to secure it? So all of those pieces come into the practice of governance.
So give us an example of quality for different data types. What does that mean?
So different quality, you may have data that you're pulling together from different sources. If you've got things in legacy systems where people enter data one way and, 10 years later somebody's entering something else a different way, those standards change. People change how they enter it. We don't have a code for that. We're going to put in XYZ. The next group comes around and says, we're going to put a code in there that's ABC. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, now you're starting to get into some of those quality challenges. Even how you use names. We deal with company names all the time. How do you input the same company name? And while some of the systems, the older systems, were built with states in mind, what are the states? Oh, by the way, we deal with Canada, we deal with other entities, and they're not coded, so somebody's going to make something up and put it in there. So we really got to take all of that into account.
And if that doesn't all go right, then ultimately the applications don't work. Or they don't give you the right results.
Well, garbage in, garbage out. So when you're doing your analytics and you're trying to look at your data and you're trying to visualize it, and then all of a sudden you're looking at errors and those kind of things. So you have to take into account all of that.
Yeah, I imagine that's an issue for the EPA because you may have regulated facilities and, frankly, companies operate under many, many, many names, some on purpose, some just because that's how they've grown organically over the decades. And so if you want to know who's responsible for a given source, that the data can become a very important determinant there.
Yeah, so data quality for scientific data and for regulatory data is obviously hugely important. And that particular issue of facilities is very interesting because you're right, facilities operate under different names. They might not even have the same ownership year over year. So trying to understand when data is reported with a particular facility name, if you can match that to another facility, is this other facility with the same name, the same facility, is it different facility? Is a facility with a different name, the same facility? Who's their parent company? Are they attached to other facilities? We actually have a shared service we run in EPA called the Facility Registry Service, which is designed to help us understand that and to normalize that data. And so there are some rules about, some laws about how we can collect that data and how much we can change that data and how much we can force it to be normalized. But to the extent that we can, we have this system that not only that works across all of our programs and that we encourage other agencies to use too, because the more information we have in one place, one source of truth about facilities, the better picture we have across not only the EPA but the rest of the government, and then to the public to have information about those facilities.
So how does the idea of one source of truth, which really makes a lot of sense, how does that overlay on the idea of cloud and contracting with cloud providers? Can you have cloud services and still have one point of truth, one source of truth?
So as someone said off the air, cloud is just a tool, right? We should be able to maintain that same database, whether it's in the cloud or on premise, whether we have components of that database in both locations. It shouldn't matter where the data is. And if being in the cloud is a detriment, then we shouldn't put it there. But often with this sort of data, being in the cloud is actually a benefit.
Okay, and Todd, I remember many years ago, Hellman's Mayonnaise used to have a thing on its label. West of the Rockies, it's known by something else, I forget. And so FDA has the same issue with multiple names, multiple titles for what might be the same regulated or watched entity. And so how does that figure into how you do governance of data, quality of data, and contracting for cloud services?
So it's obviously a big issue for us. And I think that it's kind of important to step back when answering that question, because the data governance piece is really that framework of policies and standards that we want to have in place. But underneath that data governance framework, there are technologies. And that, I think, is the key piece that drives the quality, the content, the relationships, the change management, the access, the processing. That's that you're going to get out of a good master data management tool set that encompasses other attributes like data loss prevention and presentation, visualization. And so I think that to talk about data governance, you can talk about the governance and where you want to be and how you want your data set to look. But in order to get that line of data in, data out, all looking exactly the same, whether it's in the cloud or on premise or in some hybrid cloud scenario, you really need to think about that tool set that really enforces that data governance model.
Oh, so that is something that probably used to come with proprietary databases that everybody used, the same few for a long, long time. Now the market for data products is completely open, and there's millions of different types of tools and databases and data set tools. So what does a master data management tool set roughly look like?
So there are many COTS products out there, and I think that it will hit those core areas. It'll look at the data quality in terms of content. It'll look at how to align the relationships so that one drop down in one application has the same data set in it that another dropdown has. So they're all feeding off of a master database. And it kind of removes the ability of inaccurate data going in there. A good data management or a master data management tool set will have a mechanism embedded in it that will account for change management. So one of the keys in governing data is making sure that the owners of the data know when that data has changed. So how do you do that? Good change management. And that's usually embedded through some notification system. This company has changed its name. So that record is going to be permanently updated in our master data management tool set. And therefore, every time you see that new company name, it's going to be persistent throughout the entire life cycle of your data.
Well, Alan, that sounds like you have databases of databases or databases of data. So you've got a multiple layer situation going here, and what are best practices for managing all of that?
So at NetApp, we provide storage technology that many of these databases set upon. and we need to critically protect all this infrastructure. And I also believe that it's exceptionally important as you protect this information to make sure that you're not locked into any specific vendor or technology. Vendors such as myself, we need to create new intellectual property that adds strategic value to our customers and those that use this technology. But being locked into it equivalently in the end will hurt our end customers. So one of the things that we try to do is innovate underneath industry standards. So as an example, from NetApp, we produce network storage. But underneath of that network storage protocols, we provide things like compression and deduplication, which customers can take advantage of, but at the same time, they're doing it under standards. And that's when you move into the cloud technology, that's the same thing you need to look for all cloud vendors. Or am I moving my data sets or my databases into a cloud? And is that a format or a function that I'm going to take advantage of that I can't get in a different cloud? And so you need to be very mindful of those technology changes and what it may ultimately cost your organization.
Melvin.
Yes, so for the first time in history, the source of most of the data is coming from outside a tablet or a desktop. It's coming from a mobile device. And what we're seeing is this convergence of social, mobile, analytics, and cloud. And so we take this convergence to mean that we need to be more cognizant of how data is coming in, what the source might be. Our data governance strategy should be flexible enough to deal with all these different types of data coming in from different sources. But also, as data becomes more fused, so different classifications of data become related to one another in ways that we may or may not have anticipated in the past, our data governance strategy needs to be aware of it, be in a position to change the way that it's shared or who it's shared with or how it's supported or supplied or stored based on this new fusion mechanism. And so we are looking at and evaluating a number of important aspects of this data fusion and integration capability as part of data governance.
Because I was thinking all of this ultimately has to add up to mission support and program support. And Maria, that brought to mind the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, which recently issued a really laudably frank report on itself. It missed a few things in one of the national safety issues. And one of the things they cited was the ability to integrate data from different sources. And they know now that they've got to be better at this. So it sounds like some of these new technologies, these new approaches can really help the mission delivery in a more consistent way.
And it could. And specifically, I have an example, actually, I'll share with you of something where we're going to have multiple data sources coming from many different directions. And when you look at the national address across the country, think about address as your house, right? Think about a national address database. It does not exist today. And we're embarking on a pilot where we're partnering with the Census Bureau, the Postal Service, Microsoft, Google, other industry, other agencies to really build out what should be a national address database. And when you think about what it takes to do that, so you've got 50 states, the District of Columbia, you've got territories, you've got tribal, everybody does addressing potentially differently. But when you talk about geospatial and you start spatially enabling things as well, you also have different data types. You've got tagging certainly that could be going on, and an address is just not a house address or an apartment number. It could be, a mile marker on the C&O Canal, for example. So when you're pulling all this data in, potentially, you have data from lots of different sources, and I'm telling you, every state does it differently, and there's some states that cities don't play with their states. So, how that feeds up from the local level, from the local town, the local county, up to the state, and then further up. We're working with the states and, like I said, other, companies on this. How do we do this? And, frankly, the technology, I'm going to say it's relatively easy. So the technology is easy. We can pull in that data, and we can start building out a pilot and start moving that data in. We'll have to address the data quality issues, of course, how it's handled differently. But probably the biggest part of the discussion we had about 6 weeks ago with all these people in a room for 2 days is really about the governance and how you pull all that data together. Who then owns it? Is it an authoritative source? Who gets to use it? How do we make it available? Ultimately, you want your certainly state and locals, 911, to be able to use this database. But how do we update it? How frequently do we update it? Are some states more mature than others? We can get, feeds every time something goes from the town, city, up to the state and up to, this one master national address database. The governance around that is going to be the harder piece of that, because you got to figure out, technology, again, is relatively easy. We can do this. But that governance structure and who owns it, who are the key stakeholders, how do we manage it? That's
And who
the
can
harder
change
piece.
it too, because
who can change it? And
it's a moving object all the time.
If there's errors, what's the process for feedback back to the state to say that there's a problem? And if a state isn't sending us the data, maybe it's a big city that's sending us because they don't play with the state and they're ahead of the state. Well, what's that feedback loop to tell them there's errors? And do I really ultimately even have the authority to even touch that data and change it? I can compile it, pull it together. Maybe I flag it and send it back. So we're working through that.
Well, maybe you can bring back 14th and a half Street. I miss that street. Easy way to get across the river that no longer exists.
Let me write that down.
and at EPA, you have a similar problem because you do have many, many entities that have to be brought together in some kind of a master view. Is that something you're working on also?
Yeah, so we certainly have challenges around data reporting from states, tribes, the regulated community, and bringing all that data together. But I think what's actually more interesting right now in terms of data governance is the fact that we're starting to see both sensor data and data from citizens that are using sensors to submit data to us. So we're trying to figure out how to use monitoring. The Internet of Things is, obviously everyone's very excited by the Internet of Things. And how do we, instead of sending an inspector out to look at a smokestack, we put a monitor on that. We don't just get data on that smokestack at 2:00 on Thursday. We get data on that smokestack 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Or if we want to look at the temperature in a river, for example, we can put a monitor out there, look at that every day, all day, and pull in that data. And the challenges with that are being able to, first of all, collect that volume of data. Right, and decide if, in fact, I need every data point, or, in fact, I can, say, take a data point every minute or a data point every 2 minutes. So I have to validate whether that's good data and at that smaller interval, or at that larger interval, excuse me. And then also, when I get that data in, how do I make sure, as I ingest that data into my systems, that it's actually right? If I get a data point that says the temperature of the water was 107 degrees Fahrenheit, it probably means there's a boat idling next to that sensor, not that the river was really 107 degrees Fahrenheit. So how do I drop out that bad data? One great example is we're doing air monitoring at, I think, about a dozen locations throughout the U.S. There's actually an air monitoring station in China that's a park bench with a bunch of air monitoring in it, and we can send that data back to the EPA right now. So
All right. So if somebody opens an onion bread there, then it might really change the sensor data that you get.
it might, and we drop that data point out.
All right, very good. Good place to take a break right now, which we will do. Our guests today are Maria Roat, the Chief Technology Officer at the Transportation Department. Ann Duncan is the Chief Information Officer at the EPA. Todd Simpson is CIO of the Food and Drug Administration, Melvin Greer, Senior Fellow and Chief Strategist at Lockheed Martin, and Alan Dare, District Manager for NetApp's U.S. Public Sector Cloud Team. And I'm your moderator, Tom Temin, here on Navigating Cloud Contracting, Who Owns the Data, sponsored by NetApp and Lockheed Martin on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com.